Well, I just keep on rolling through these divisional previews. Hopefully I get through all of them in the next few hours or so. It's time to talk about the division where my heart is, the one that is nearest and dearest to me, the NFC North. I look at this division, and you could say that it was thrown into a little bit of upheaval a little bit back when Teddy Bridgewater shredded his knee and was lost for the season to the Minnesota Vikings. That it opened things up a lot, and to a degree it did. I don't know that with Teddy Bridgewater, the Vikings were my pick to win the division anyways, but it most certainly could potentially open up things for other teams in the division in theory, like the Chicago Bears, like the Detroit Lions, maybe the Minnesota Vikings, even though they're a ridiculous trade for Sam Bradford. Maybe they can still find a way to repeat as division champions. I just don't know if they were going to do that with Teddy, and I most certainly don't know that I believe that they can do it without Teddy. Now, you look at this division, I'll start off with the Detroit Lions. What the hell? You look at a team that started off in a really, really bad fashion last year. They went to London, got embarrassed, got steamrolled, fired their offensive coordinator. But a funny thing happened that second half of the season. The Detroit Lions started to play good football. I believe in their last 8 games, they went something like 6-2. I mean, they played well enough to save Caldwell's job. He was able to escape the wrath of Martha Ford. Most other people in the building did not. It was ugly. But this is a team, an organization, a coaching staff, players. Everybody feels the pressure to win because the gauntlet has been placed down by the owner. It's time to win and piece it together. I just don't know that the Detroit Lions have what it takes this year to be a playoff team. I'd be really surprised if this wasn't the last year of Jim Caldwell in Detroit, which is unfortunate. You look at this team, just looking at them on paper, there's a lot of weaknesses. You look at the running game. This is a team that really struggled to run the ball last year. And as a result, it put an awful lot of pressure on Matthew Stafford to try and win football games. And, especially early on in the year, it just didn't pay off very well. The fact is while it's a pass-first league now, you still have to be able to run the football. And even with investing a second-round pick in Amir Abdullah and what have you, the Detroit Lions consistently just were not able to run the ball last year. And I don't know that they're going to be a whole lot better at it this year. So that could lead to more pressure on Matthew Stafford in the passing game, which is really unfortunate for this organization because they just lost the best player they've had over the past decade in Calvin Johnson, Megatron, due to retirement. So how is this team going to look without its number one option? You've still got Golden Tate, but now you're looking at him trying to be a number one as opposed to the number 2 that he's better suited to be. You paid big money to Marvin Jones in free agency to come in, but Marvin Jones is not Megatron, and we all freaking know that. So now you take that, combine it with an offensive line that with the addition of first-round pick Daylor Decker hopefully will be better, but still has some questions in terms of its ability to open holes in the running game and in particular, and maybe even just as importantly, if not more so, adequately protect on the outside in the passing game for Matthew Stafford. There's a lot of offensive questions here, a lot of offensive questions. And you look at the defense is solid. I don't know that they're great, but they can be solid. But I just don't know if they're enough to overcome. You look at the Lions' early schedule. They got 3 of their first 4 games on the road, which is going to be a real struggle. Part of the struggle with Matthew Stafford over the years as starting quarterback of the Detroit Lions is they just don't beat a lot of marquee teams. They just don't beat a lot of teams with winning records. He just doesn't do that. And at some point in time, if you want to be a playoff team, you have to beat some other playoff teams. You have to beat some quality opponents. And that's a big reason why I'm really down on the Lions' chances this year. Not saying their schedule is overwhelmingly tough or anything like that. I just don't know if they can beat enough quality or even good or average teams to be able to really make a difference. And you look at another stretch of their schedule, if the 3 of the first 4 on the road, they've got to find a way to maybe break even. If they can go 2-2 in that stretch, they've got a chance to stay in there because then weeks 5 through 7, they host Philadelphia, the Rams, and the Redskins. Those are 3 potentially winnable games. So if you can go 2-2 in the first 4 with 3 of those first 4 on the road and then follow that up and maybe you go 2-1 in that 3-game homestand between weeks 5 and 7, you're 4-3 after 7 weeks? There are other teams that would love to have that position. But I just don't know when I look at this Lions team that they have what it takes to be a playoff team this year. Which brings me to another team, the Chicago Bears. I see some progress And I like some of the moves that have been made the past couple of years in terms of free agency and the draft with new general manager Ryan Pace. I think there is a slight trajectory in the right direction. I can see some tangible improvements. But again, we're talking about an organization that was in a really, really bad way. An organization from a talent standpoint that was incredibly deficient on many different levels, trying to plug the holes with free agency and trades, with old players, guys that didn't fit, guys with their own issues and mentalities and mindsets and egos, like the Brandon Marshalls and the Martellus Bennett's of the worlds and what have you. You know, this is a team that is still in a period of transition, because after many years of just absolutely horrendous drafting for the most part, you know, the talent cupboard was bare in many areas on both sides of the ball. You know, they've got a quality coaching staff, especially with John Fox and Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball. This is a well-coached defensive unit. I really like their linebacking core this year with Danny Trevathan, Jarrell Freeman on the inside. You've got Willie Young, and Lamar Houston, getting the names mixed up here, and Pernell McPhee on the outside, along with first-round pick Leonard Floyd. You know, this is a linebacking core that can play really, really well. They've improved up the middle. They've got some depth on the outside. You know, when McPhee comes back from the PUP list, if Leonard Floyd can figure it out and be a nice depth player this year, a situational pass rusher, you know, to spell and complement Young and Houston, you know, this is a team that could get some pressure on opposing quarterbacks. This is a team that could be much more solid on the second level of their defense than they were last year, that's for sure, in an area at linebacker where they were really talent deficient, in particular in the middle. You know, you look at this and you've got some continuity there at quarterback for whatever that's worth with Jay Cutler. But, you know, for a team that's going through a transition and a rebuilding, they at least know what they've got in Cutler. We know how I feel about Cutler and all that, but at the end of the day, they've at least know what they've got. I've got some real questions about this team. They've still got a lack of depth all across the board, both on the offensive and defensive side. And in particular on the offensive side of the ball, in recent years, you've traded away Brandon Marshall and Martellus Bennett. You let Matt Forte walk via free agency. You really are lacking experience on the offensive side of the ball. You're asking a lot of Jeremy Langford and Kevin White and so on, and some of the players on the offensive line potentially later on, when I assume he start at some point in time in the year, and Cody Whitehair. You know, just a lot of lack of continuity and experience on the offensive side. And none of the rookies out of this draft class are starting right now, which to me is a bit of a problem because a couple of them should be, most notably Jonathan Bullard, Cody Whitehair, and DeAndre Hall. All three of them should be starting, and it is a stupid crime that John Fox and Vic Fangio are not starting them. You know, and that's part of the concern I have about this team, is they should be heading in one direction, but based off of the coaching staff and the personality and the mentality that they have, they try to go in another direction and play it safe, and it's just not the way to go. I want to see this year, when this rookie class starts to make its stamp on this season, makes a name for himself. Leonard Floyd, Cody Whitehair, Jonathan Bullard, Deion Bush, DeAndre Hall, Jordan Howard. You know, those are the guys I'm looking for to make some contributions this year in particular. You know, the Bears need something out of this rookie class, because the talent roster still isn't great on either side of the ball. Looking at their schedule, you know, the one stretch I look at with a little bit of interest that determines right in the middle of the year whether the Bears could be taken somewhat seriously, or they're just a team that plays hard, plays it close to the vest, is well coached, but isn't good enough yet. Look at Week 7, they go to Green Bay, play on Thursday night, and then the following week, Week 8, they play Minnesota at home on Monday night. You know, that's a stretch of games right there against two superior teams in the division. If the Bears win one of these games, you know, then they got to feel a little bit better about themselves. But this team is still at least a year away, in my humble opinion, from really being able to cause any damage. I mean, you just have to understand just how bad off things were. And while they're getting better, there's still a long ways to go. You know, if this team gets to 8-8 this year, I'm going to be really, really happy. Anything over that is like icing on the cake. They're probably at best a 7-9 team, and even though that's not much of an improvement in terms of record from the year before, that could be an indication of progress, even though at the end of the day, until they figure out a young, long-term answer at the quarterback position, how much is it really going to matter? You know, the Minnesota Vikings, when you look past the Bridgewater injury for a second, this is still a well-coached team with a really good defensive front seven and just a solid stud defense, period. You've still got one of the best running backs in the league in Adrian Peterson. I think they've improved their offensive line some with the signing in the offseason of Andre Smith. Hopefully that will help protect and eventually Sam Bradford at some point in time. This is still a good Vikings team. And while I was expecting Teddy Bridgewater to make some progress and take a big step in year number 3, the fact is the way the Minnesota Vikings under offensive coordinator Norv Turner kind of structured their offense, they really play it close to the vest. They don't take a lot of chances. And I most certainly don't think that's going to change with Sam Bradford eventually taking over the helm from Sean Hill. This is a team that may not be a lot different than they were last year, if we're being honest. With that said, I really questioned the trading for Sam Bradford. That was dumb. You're giving up a first and future 4th-round pick at worst to get a possible 1-year rental who really hasn't done shit at the NFL level. That's just crazy. And you're bringing him in so late in the program that he's not even going to be your week 1 starter. So you're getting a diminishing return for all that you gave up. It's just, I don't know that the move was necessary. I have concerns about the wide receiver position. While Stephon Diggs was a revelation out of the 5th round last year, and I think Laquan Treadwell was a good selection for the Vikings in round 1 this year, there's still some questions about how that wide receiving unit is going to come together, especially with Bradford throwing him the ball now. I have concerns about Blair Walsh. How much is he mentally affected by missing that kick in the home playoff game against Seattle where they should have won and advanced to the divisional round? And then team mentality, too. Looking at that difficult playoff loss last year. Looking at the loss of Teddy Bridgewater and how much that mentally and emotionally impacted the players on that team and, frankly, the coaching staff, too. Where is this team's mindset going to be? And how are they going to face this season and try to make the best out of this situation? You'll get an answer early on in the year, weeks 2 and 3. They host Green Bay, and then they go to Carolina. And you'll find out right away whether the Vikings have any elements of being for real this year or not. And then a little bit later on, in weeks 8 and 9, 2 games that are winnable and they need to win if they have any chances of banging with Green Bay in this division. They go to Chicago and they host Detroit. They must win those 2 games. And frankly, they need to beat either Green Bay or Carolina in week 2 or 3 if they want to bang with Green Bay in this division. I just don't know that they're going to. Again, are you really going to put a lot of stock in Sam Bradford? I don't think so. I think the Vikings are a 9-win team, maybe a 10-win team. Maybe they can sneak into the playoffs, but it wouldn't be a totally lost year, but it's not maybe what they thought it was going to be. But frankly, I think people were getting a little carried away with the Vikings in terms of the hype machine this year. I'm just saying, even with Bridgewater. I think overall, the class of the division is the Green Bay Packers. They have been for years. Yes, ultimately, they didn't win the division last year. But unlike the Vikings, they did win a playoff game last year. So let's call it as it is. They have arguably the best quarterback in the National Football League in Aaron Rodgers. What you really have to like about the Green Bay Packers is there's a lot of continuity, not a ton of roster turnover. You get these players that are drafted and developed through your program. They're brought up through the program that are there for several years, so they're familiar with the roles. They're familiar with each other. There's a lot of continuity and chemistry on both sides of the ball, a lot of understanding of what you can do, what you can't do. That really makes a big difference. And now we're uncertain of how Jordy Nelson is going to come back this year, but it has to be great for the Packers offense to have Jordy Nelson come back because their offense just wasn't the same without him last year. He's the clear-cut number 1, and once you have him in that number 1 position, Randall Cobb falls into place, Devontae Adams falls into place, so on and so forth. With Jordy Nelson not there, you're expecting too much out of this guy and that guy and that guy. Now you bring Nelson back into the fold. This is still one of the best receiving corps in the National Football League. I have concerns about their offensive line, especially with the inexplicable release of Josh Sitton. I understand there may be some long-term salary cap concerns there or contract concerns there, but you just let go of a multi-time Pro Bowl talent and got nothing in return on an offensive line that already was somewhat shaky and questionable to begin with. I look at the running game and Eddie Lacy. Eddie Lacy lost some weight in the offseason, yes, but is it going to translate during the regular season on the football field? Because they need it to. They need Eddie Lacy to be that pivot point, to be that balance for this offense, to help keep the defense off the field some. Because if he can be that, he adds a whole different dimension to the Green Bay Packers, and this can be a really scary team. A really scary team. And in fact, I think they are a legit threat in the NFC to potentially go to the Super Bowl. I've got them winning at least 11 games and maybe 12. I do think with what happened in Minnesota with Bridgewater, that knocks them down a peg. The Bears aren't quite ready. The Lions aren't ready. I do think I would be really surprised if the Packers didn't win the NFC North this year by 2 or 3 games. I really would be, because they've got by far the best quarterback in the division, the most continuity in the division, and the most overall talent in the division. They might not be the best coach team. That might go to Minnesota and even Chicago. But they've got enough coaching and enough talent and enough chemistry and continuity and familiarity. The Green Bay Packers, for all rights and purposes, should be running away with this division and hiding in 2016.